He's a senior software engineer at Liberty Mutual, but he also plays piano and sings in a classic rock band. Obviously, right? Obviously. And so he's here to talk to us about, and I got to make sure I get this right, when you take JSX, remove React, and sprinkle in htmx, what do we get? Please welcome Turner Houghton. Go get him.
Thank you. All right. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Turner Houghton, and I'm going to be speaking on, the title of my talk is JSX minus React plus htmx, which probably doesn't make sense to a lot of you right now. Hopefully, once I kind of explain how we're going to do things, it'll make a little bit more sense. But yeah, so a little bit about me, from Salt Lake City, Utah. Who else here is from Utah? There are dozens of us. Yes, love to see it. Anyways, so yeah, as mentioned in the intro, I'm a senior software engineer at Liberty Mutual. Been there for almost 3 years now. And kind of my specialty over my programming career has kind of been AWS Cloud, the quote-unquote serverless set of services that they have, AWS Lambda, API Gateway, DynamoDB, all that good stuff. And when I'm not working or programming, I'm a bit of a PC gamer, history enjoyer, love Magic the Gathering, and yeah, as mentioned, singer and pianist in a rock band. So let's get started. So, thought this was kind of applicable. I've been mostly back-end throughout my career. However, I've dabbled a little bit in front-end. I would say I have probably like 6 years of React experience. It was, of course, the last framework I learned out of necessity. First started with AngularJS, and then nobody used that anymore. So then they all moved to Angular 2, which completely changed everything. And then I landed on Vue, which I liked, but no one was hiring for Vue. So React was kind of something I was forced to learn. But over the 6 years I've used React, I can definitely say it has some good things about it. And yeah, I think the first thing is that I think when they made the change to function components, I think most people in the community like that. I think it kind of helped simplify, at least on the surface level, what your components look like. And then I would say another big thing is JSX as kind of your templating language in React just feels good to use. It just feels like you're naturally extending HTML. I know we had some talks earlier today about like adding custom elements to HTML, but this is kind of like a similar way to do that same thing, right? Like you're writing your own components and then just kind of interleaving them with normal HTML. So it feels very natural. And then, I guess a little bit later on, right, in React's timeline, we start looking at how do we do stuff on the server. And I think the kind of initial spec of like what is a server component where you can just kind of naturally do async things and nothing breaks is it had a good spec for handling asynchronous operations. And then kind of around the same time, we also kind of got the idea of having suspense boundaries or error boundaries, so you don't have to repeat the same if loading, return this 50 billion times in your app. You can just have one component where you do all of that stuff. And then also, I think most of us love the fact that it is strongly typed with TypeScript, so you immediately know if you are just doing something dumb like passing in the wrong props, It's great stuff there. So now to talk about some of the things we don't really like about React. And I'm sure everyone who has used React can attest to the fact that when you're dealing with a bunch of use effects with use state dependencies, not very friendly to your grug brain. That's the managing dependencies for effects does not come easy, and it can lead to very frustrating debugging scenarios. The other fact that is kind of not super great coming in as a newbie is just the idea that data fetching on the client kind of requires a whole other abstraction that's not really part of the framework, but you kind of need it unless you want to write like 300 lines of deduping logic and a bunch of stuff like that. And then, yeah, kind of around the same time we added server components, we also did things like Next.js, which kind of introduced a lot of complexity and not very clear boundaries as to like, okay, well, what should server component? I feel like there wasn't a lot of good resources to know like, okay, well, what should I be doing in my server components versus my client components? And like, how should those communication layers work? I know in Next.js we got things like server actions and things like that that just kind of add a lot of stuff without not really telling you a great way to use it. And then, yeah, just the fact that because you have a client application, if you're doing things like permission checks or any type of access control, you're going to end up with a lot of duplicate logic on your client. That also needs to be on your server. And then finally, just the fact that if you want to render it in your application component tree, it has to be a component. So if you find some cool library out there on NPM that's not a component, you still have to figure out a way to wrap that in a component and then make sure the right hooks are being called. But anyways, not an exhaustive list, but just a few of the things that we run into. But what if we could take some of the things that we did like about React on that list and use that as kind of a baseline for our journey into fully server-side rendered apps? And kind of part of the goal of this talk was to be like, okay, well, front-end developers already know about all these tools. They already know about JSX as a templating language. They already know like how to use Tailwind to generate responsive styles and that kind of stuff. So how can we take the existing good parts of the front-end ecosystem and use that on the server? And so, yeah, part of that is what if we could just use JSX without bringing in any of the other stuff about React, like all of the hooks and creating actual elements in the DOM. And yeah, what if you could just intuitively use async code in your components without having to worry about complex state management? And as kind of a side part of this talk is going to be how can we use cloud infrastructure as it exists today to build this out, to build an application like this. So, without further ado, let's put JSX where it belongs, on the server, not the client. So, we're going to go over real quick the tech stack I decided to use. I'm going to show a little demo later. A lot of these pieces are interchangeable. You could probably swap them out with whatever tool you want to use. Obviously, we have to use Node.js because JSX is a JavaScript XML format. So that part's staying. We're going to use Express just because that's the pretty stable a pretty stable like server framework in Node, been around a long time. There's other options like Fastify, Hono. But yeah, we're going to use that here. And then KitaJS is a library that's going to give us our JSX templating support on the server. And it also has a lot of other nice built-ins that are going to help with suspense and error boundaries. And it also has built-in autocomplete support for all of your favorite htmx attributes, like hx, get, and all that good stuff. And then, yeah, and then we're also going to be using Tailwind just to kind of make it easy for existing projects already using Tailwind to use this kind of thing. Obviously, you could just use normal CSS or whatever CSS framework you want to use, and then htmx for some of those front-end transitions. And then on the infra side, I've defined this whole project as an AWS CDK infrastructure project, which if you don't know what the CDK is, stands for Cloud Development Kit. It's just a way to define your AWS resources in TypeScript. Makes it really easy to deploy out configuration changes. And yeah, using the CDK, we're going to just set up a simple Lambda function. One thing you do have to know about Lambda functions, though, is that they do not have support for WebSockets as part of the runtime, so you're going to have to find something else if you need that kind of stuff. But we are going to use HTML. We're going to use response streaming, which is going to let us do some cool things with streaming HTML from the server to the client when we have to like wait for the database to give us stuff back. So we'll go into that a little bit on the next slide as well. And then finally, for our data store, I just decided to use it because it's new. Amazon Aurora DSQL stands for Distributed SQL. It's kind of like Planet Scale or any of the other databases out there that just let you connect pretty easily from your Lambda functions. And then finally, CloudFront and Web Application Firewall to secure everything. So first, a little bit of how KitaJS works. So you do have to think about your components kind of in a different way when you're building out an app like this versus coming from React, because you're not actually creating elements in the DOM. You are creating basically you're rendering string templates that are then getting all compiled together and then delivered to the client as a full HTML page. So all of our components have a restriction that they can return string data or a promise that returns string data. And that's going to come in clutch when we start looking into response streaming, because KitaJS automatically handles when it gets a promise back and knows, okay, this is something I have to wait to send and then send as a streamed response later. And it's going to do that using like placeholder elements and template fragments, which you don't really have to know a whole lot about that. But yeah, and then pretty much the only thing we have to really change about this compared to a normal project is that we just add the JSX import source to tell TypeScript, hey, we want to use KitaJS to handle rendering these JSX files compared to React instead of React. So these are what our pages and components end up looking like in this system, where you can see on the left here, we have these pretty much, they look like just normal functions that just take in properties, kind of the same way you would build out server-side components, server components in React. But yeah, since they're TSX files, we can just return other components and wrap them, or just normal good old HTML. And then on the right here is kind of how you would set up the streaming to stream that to the client. This render to stream function comes from KitaJS, and then that lets you stream the response back to the client. So, without further ado, let's hop into the demo here. So, this is the app in all of its glory. Let me see, is that showing? Okay, perfect. So, yeah, I built this in about a week. I intentionally left out any kind of optimizations around like caching or only returning fragments on updates to kind of show what kind of the bare bone performance is that you're getting. You might notice it's a little bit slow because we're starting a Lambda up from scratch, but I have all of these templates I've defined on the left here, or snippets. And if I click on one of these, it'll take me to it. That loading state that you just saw is that placeholder element I was talking about, where that gets sent, and then the server keeps the stream open and then sends the rest of the content later, and then we just do a swap out once that template comes back. But basically, it's just a simple markdown editor app that I kind of built here. Did some customization so you can like link to other sections of your markdown. And yeah, if we go to the settings page, these are some of the libraries that I used to build it. Yeah, the main ones being Express, KitaJS, Drizzle for the database connections. We have a few bits of hyperscript in there for when you like, if you have some code that has a code block in it, then this little copy button copies things for you. But yeah, let me see, is this sharing again? Bro, can't me? Do I need to make that full screen again? Oh, there we go. Okay, it looks like that worked. Okay, but yeah. And yeah, pretty simple. It uses OIDC for authentication, so you didn't see it there, but I have like auth0, sign in with GitHub. That stuff is super easy to set up using OpenID Connect. Yeah, it didn't include the cloud. If you do go to the code here, didn't include the CloudFront resources, but that's what gives me that custom sn1p.net domain. But yeah, so some of the kind of end this talk with going over some of the downsides and then the upsides of you building things out as a stack like this. And the first thing I would definitely say is that Aurora Distributed SQL is very new and not super well supported yet. I had to kind of write my own custom logic for doing database migrations because none of the big database ORM libraries currently support DSQL. And yeah, KitaJS has a few rough edges. Their docs are great, but they're also going through a refactor of their library at the moment and say, don't use this in prod, but I decided to anyways. But yeah, hopefully that's not a problem once they get through that. And then yeah, I also did kind of try to vibe code with AI for this project, and sometimes Copilot still thinks you're writing React code, so it'll like try to use react.fc props, and you just have to tell it no. The other thing I found out is I was trying to use this at my job, and I found out that HTML streaming is not supported everywhere. Some like networking or networking security tools will force the stream to close before it delivers anything back. So then you're kind of back to having an app that doesn't have the response streaming. So that's something to keep in mind. And then one of the biggest downsides, in my opinion, is that you are still a JavaScript or TypeScript Andy with this stack. And you don't have an excuse to go learn Go or Rust. But, or Java, yeah. But, let's talk about some of the upsides, though, that I noticed building this. And that it still is a very vibe code friendly stack, especially if you're using Tailwind. I think Copilot and all of the major LLMs are pretty good at giving you back at least something to start with when you're looking at styling your application. And I don't know, it just kind of like this full stack application just kind of feels like you're back in the good old days of building out LAMP stack apps with like Laravel or something in jQuery, but instead of Laravel, it's Express. Instead of jQuery, it's htmx and hyperscript stuff. And I think one of the most important things is that the code does what it looks like it does. You don't have to worry about some like use effect somewhere that's all of a sudden making your function render 200 times instead of the 2 times you thought it was, because all of your components are just turning everything into strings, essentially. And as you can see from the demo, like once you get past that initial Lambda cold start time, page loads are actually reasonably fast with no caching enabled. You could really tweak this a lot, though, and get it working really fast with cache control headers and that kind of stuff. The other benefit about using the KitaJS streaming approach is that when you do that, you also remove the need to have most client-side fetching going on. Most of the time, the only fetches you need to do are when you're doing a put or a delete or a post on a new resource, because all of your gets, if they call the database, they're just getting streamed in instead of delaying the UI rendering. One of the last things I would say is that it's a great stack for personal projects, especially if you use the infrastructure that I do in this project with Lambda and CloudFront and everything. I think the most expensive part of this was the custom domain. That's like $10 a year. Everything else is well within AWS free tier. As I mentioned, still has room for optimization on the app performance side. And then finally, you can finally use class instead of class name in your JSX. I consider that a huge win just for sanity all around. So the time is now. So if you're a front-end engineer, you're looking to try out server-side apps with htmx, I feel like this is a great kind of stack to get started in and still use some of the existing front-end tooling to build it out. So with that, I think that's it.
Nicely done. So talk to me about this KitaJS. This is not something I've ever heard of. How long has it been around? I know you said it's in the middle of a major rewrite, but how long has it been around? Who's working on it? What was like the impetus for it to get started?
I think it was actually started by some guy in Brazil, and I'm not super sure on the details. All I know is I found it 2-ish years ago when I kind of started messing around with htmx and building out these types of applications. But I know it's been around for at least 2 years, probably a similar life cycle, or maybe a year behind however long htmx has been around.
Wow.
So
Okay.
it's
and you mentioned at some point getting some of this, I don't remember which part of the stack introduced at your company, and your company's Liberty Mutual, right?
Yeah.
What's it like trying to get a new tech introduced into a company that is very large and maybe traditional, we'll say?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. Yeah, because like at my company, everything's kind of already built around React as kind of like the main way to do front end. But I remember someone, I think it might have been Carson, said like one of the best ways to kind of get htmx apps into your job is to like build out some like random admin UI somewhere, some project that like only developers would ever use or people internal to your company, and get it used there. And so yeah, was kind of my initial exploration, was an innovation project at my company where I was like, oh, I'm just going to build this admin application for us to see some different data from different systems, and built it out that way. So
I like that.
Yeah.
That's sneaky. That's a good idea. Y'all give it up for Turner. That was very interesting. Good job.
thank you.
Good job.